Students around the world are finishing their qualifications so they can get ahead in life and make their contribution. If you are studying, researching, or thinking about it, you will need practical tips, techniques, coaching, and support to help you get finished and be successful. I'm Peter Alkemer, the Student Success Coach, and welcome to the podcast. Each episode, I interview successful students and leaders in education so that you will learn everything you need right here. You will learn about writing, completing your thesis and other projects, planning, discipline, how to get more done, supervisors, getting published, getting finished, how to have the right discipline, and many other aspects of student life. Whether you're listening on Spotify, iTunes, Google, or any other podcast platform, please leave a rating and a review. Or if you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment. Either way, please get in touch and let us know what you think of the show and what you want to hear more of. Please always check the show notes for links to courses, material, and plenty more so that you can use what you've learned in each episode, take action, and achieve your student success. Please also join the Student Success Coach community in our exclusive members-only Facebook group where I post regularly and you can interact with fellow students just like yourself. Remember, you can't do this alone, so reach out, get involved, and take advantage. It's my commitment to your success. Now for this week's episode. Alessandra, welcome to the podcast. It's absolutely fantastic to have you on the show. And, I've been looking forward to this interview so much, and you're such a supportive member of our community in the Facebook group. And I just really value, your support to the other students in our community. And my sense is that some of the things that we've been creating together, as a team, are some of the things that perhaps, you hope that, students can get value from, and that perhaps you were missing out when you were a student. So just give us a bit of a background of what you studied and what your journey was like, and some of the things perhaps that you thought you would have benefited from when you were in those, in those days.
Cool. So I did electrical engineering at WITS, and I started in 2010. So we had the cool vibe of the soccer, and we had that whole month off in when the soccer started. So I started then, and I took a little bit of a scenic route, and I only finished in 2016. But I mean, obviously, I don't know if you've heard with engineering. Obviously, you have. Is that success rates aren't that high with engineering. So I mean, that's why I guess my path was maybe a little bit different to others, but I enjoyed it. My failures turned into my successes, and I did so much in those years that I failed, and I always just kind of wanted to be better. So I finished in 2016, and I took the chance and I applied for NRF funding for masters. I had no hopes of getting it, and I did. I managed to get it, and I started studying in 2017 for my master's, also in engineering, in the field of engineering education. That was really kind of close to my heart, obviously because I failed so many years. I've always wondered why there were so many students that were passing. There were some that were passing in 4 years, but the majority of people were passing in 5, 6, 7, or even 8 years. So I mean, I kind of wanted to give back and add some contribution to try to figure out this global problem, really. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I did mechanical engineering. I started in 1994, first year. So a little bit before that, but I do remember, in our first lecture, they said, okay, look to the left and look to the right and look behind you. And within, 4 years, only one of you will be sitting here. Yeah. But I think that wasn't quite accurate because, although, as you experienced, it took a little bit longer, I think more people got through than that story actually sort of, conveys. It's not that sort of 3 and 4 drop out. It's more that 3 and 4 maybe take an extra year or two to get through. And I think ultimately, that's the student success that you experienced and that you achieved. And I love that quote, your failures turned into your successes. And I strongly believe that any failure is just a stepping stone to something better, and it's your mindset about how you see it and how you perceive it. And also just so interesting that you decided to really continue that in your postgraduate studies. So what did that look like?
So I met with my supervisor in my final year, and I'd met with a couple of the lecturers at WITS in my school, and none of them really kind of clicked. But when I met with Professor Steltrengov, she kind of said, you know what, I've got two research areas. I've got lightning and I've got engineering education. And I mean, now I was in fourth year. I'd never heard of, you know, what kind of research we were doing in the school, and kind of just sparked an interest. So I said to her, well, let's discuss, you know, engineering education. Let's see what that can do, and you know, where that can take us. And to me, that kind of just hit all my passions. I've always wanted to solve problems, and being able to solve such a huge problem of people failing was huge to me. I mean, I think that was honestly, it clicked as soon as she mentioned it, and immediately I kind of wanted to do it. And you know, I felt like it would really be a good contribution to education and really help future educators in the field. So, you know, it also really aligned with my passion of helping people, and which was one of the reasons why I did engineering in the first place. And to kind of know that I was going to be able to help maybe other students find ways in which that they could pass in a shorter period of time. Obviously there's no like quick fix to passing and failing, but you know, just something that I had hopes for. Yeah.
Okay, so talk me through that. I mean, it's just great to hear that you found something to study which aligned with your passion. And when I sort of coach students, and when I went through my own PhD journey, you know, I learned the importance of that, because you have to pick something that's going to sustain you and that you're willing to put in the long hours and all the effort and so on. So just talk me through then how you developed, you know, a research topic and something around which you'd make a contribution, which also aligned to your passion. How did you bring those two together, the passion and the contribution that you were going to make?
Yes, so I mean, the research area started quite broad, is that we needed to find some form of solution to the problem of students failing, or students not passing in the minimum amount of years. But I mean, in terms of how I went about it, I mean, you don't really know where to start looking. When you're coming from undergrad, all you've really seen is, here's a problem, here's some data, let's, you know, kind of solve that problem together. But with postgrad, it was very different. I had no idea where to start at all. And sure, my supervisor was there, and she did guide me a lot of the way. But the biggest starting point was reading. Was just reading about the problem as much as possible. And then I kind of got to a point where I saw what people had done, and there seemed to be a bit of a gap in the research, in the fact that a lot of people had looked for predictors for success in terms of looking quantitatively, so looking at people's results and their demographics to try figure out why they were failing, so predicting which students would fail. And you know, that kind of got me thinking, you know, we're doing it all quantitatively, which is looking at hard data, which is great, don't get me wrong. I really wanted to look further into it, but what was missing was we weren't asking the students why they thought they were failing, or what their experiences were. So that was where I kind of veered towards, you know, we need to ask our students what their experiences are, to understand how to really solve this problem, or to understand how we can understand the problem better. Yeah.
And what was that like? What did you uncover? What did students, I mean, you have researched, you know, the topic of this podcast, which is student success. So, you know, give us the answers. What is the key to student success? What do students think they need or want to become more successful?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot, right? But I mean, the main thing, and it's something that, again, this is what probably one of the reasons why I'm super engaged in the online platforms, and you know, is because students don't have the support groups or the support structures that they need. And I mean, you've got students, we're talking South Africa here, we've got students that are coming from rural areas and are honestly coming from a background where they've never really learned in English, where they've possibly learned in Zulu or Xhosa or other languages, and they're coming to this big city, leaving their families behind. And I think we found, I can't remember the exact numbers, but the number of students that come to university and are the first in their families to come, that is a huge factor in terms of their families not understanding what the kind of pressures of engineering or of university are, and then trying to adjust to being able to study and live and do all of that stuff on your own. It's a huge adjustment. So I think that was the biggest thing, and I think having a support structure from the start or building one really helps a lot. So it was one of the biggest.
Okay, and I mean, I guess, look, obviously, universities are geared up to research and to teach and to focus on the faculties and their areas of expertise. And I think while every university has different strengths and weaknesses, it might be reasonable to say that the investment in that student support aspect does vary quite a bit from institution to institution, and even within a university from one faculty to the next. So you could have a vastly different experience as a student depending on what you were studying.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, with the increased numbers of students coming in, the universities can't actually cope with the numbers increasing so much. So I mean, you have, I mean, I'm not sure of the exact numbers again, but there are very few psychologists to the number of students. So the time that's available for those psychologists, or even just in general, the lecturer numbers, or the ratio of lecturers to students is also it's a big gap. I mean, you can't ever have one-on-one with your students. So, I mean, we're really facing that, and I really do hope that the universities do really place more emphasis on support structures for students. I mean, I know the reses do. The reses really do place a lot of emphasis on that, which is fantastic. But there's a lot of students that aren't in res.
Okay. And Alessandra, I mean, just break that down for me. So at a practical level, now you are, going through your studies. You've, been to lectures. You've done some coursework. Maybe you've got some research to do now at a postgraduate level. You've got less of that interaction in the class. Obviously with the lockdowns of 2020, we probably find that education is going into a very radically different space, and a lot more of it is online, a lot more of it is done from a personal individual perspective, and you lose sometimes that interaction and almost the unspoken social contract that you have in that class setting. So what practically, would you say are some of the things that students themselves could be proactive about to set up those support structures for themselves? And then I guess, linked to that is, what do you think should be available for them to plug into? But let's just start from someone that's listening now to this podcast and says, well, I can really relate to what Alessandra is saying. And Peter's right, education is changing drastically. I want to get through my degree. I don't want to drop out. I'm maybe the first in my family to study. I've come from a vastly different background to many of these other students that I encounter, etc. What do I do? What practically, what are the tips and support advice that you could give them?
So, I mean, one of the things that I had, and luckily I didn't have this lockdown of 2020, but I was a full-time student. So I was always at university every day, pretty much 8 to 5. And I was really involved in our postgrad area. So I mean, in terms of support structure, I felt like I was always around students, staff, so lecturers. We were all kind of in the same area, which is a little bit different now in terms of having to do everything over Teams. But I mean, I always found people to speak to. So even if there was no one studying the same thing that I was doing or doing the same research that I was doing, but everyone kind of in the postgrad or the lecturer space, we all had this kind of common understanding that the research that I was doing was going to help everyone. So the more that the lecturers understood, the more that us as postgrad students who are tutoring or possibly even lecturing other students, if we understood the situation a little bit better, we would also be able to, help a lot more. So in terms of support, talking to other people is big. Don't isolate yourself into your own little research world, because there's most likely probably not someone studying the same as you or doing the same research as you. But talking to other people and, kind of verbalizing your research, and the more you do it, the better it is in terms of you being able to put words to paper. And I mean, I think what we also did, and I thought it was really fun, is we created like a running group. Not everyone ran, some people walked, but we did it once a week to clear our minds. And I mean, I think that's something that we can still do, because I mean, I think you're still allowed to the universities as a postgrad student if you can. And I think just creating those settings where you're not necessarily doing your research, but you're outside of your research base and still you're able to talk about your research on a casual level. And you're still in the back of your mind thinking of it and how you're going to solve this really complex problem, but having people to talk to. Even if you set up a Teams, I mean, even at work now, we've done that. We set up Teams calls with people in our team, and we just chat about things. Just get to know each other really a lot better. And yeah, so I think people really helps.
And I must say, I mean, just your point about find someone to talk to, and I mean, I would say most of the coaching calls that I have with students, they have the resources and they're very bright people and they're studying very complex topics, etc. But it's often only when you talk to somebody that it becomes clear for you in your own mind. Exactly. And so as a coach, often what I do is just to lead people on their own journey of self-discovery and just ask the questions, from an outsider's perspective, that help them figure it out for themselves. And 90% of the time, when I've had even just a 30-minute coaching call and I've been able to catch up with the person a couple of weeks later, yes, maybe there was a specific technique that I could help them with and that they could have got access to if they had searched online or looked in a textbook, etc., because there's nothing really new in terms of all of those disciplines. It was just the process of talking it through with me, and which they could do with somebody, a friend or yourself in a running group, or while you're running, for example, and it's opening the mind and you're exercising and you're thinking about things differently. It's just such a powerful piece of advice that I think you're mentioning there. And then practically, Alessandra, I mean, so just turning it around now, if we were to put some effort into supporting students in general and really encouraging them and supporting them and giving them people to talk to and setting up content and platforms for them to engage and to learn from, etc., what do you think that looks like? And in your research, I mean, what was it that you perhaps uncovered that was working well, that you found in other institutions, and maybe it wasn't comparable from a cultural or from a language perspective, but are there any lessons that you have from that perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the things I found through my research is that the fact that I mean, some universities really do place quite a bit of an emphasis on support. And like I said earlier, in terms of the reses, they create these like small groups where people from various areas can work together, and they always have like a mentor or someone who's older, or not necessarily older, but that's further along in their studies, or in a higher up year. And I think that really helps. It really brings it a little bit down to your level in terms of asking questions. And I know that one of the biggest things that I found with the students was that they didn't want to ask questions to the lecturers. They feel that there was almost too big of a gap between them and the lecturers. And I think that's one thing that I learned in one of my many years of undergrad was to really just get over that fear of asking your lecturer the question, because they're there to help you. They want you to learn as much as possible, but they can't always answer the questions if they don't know what the questions are. So I mean, just asking the question, even if you think it's a silly question or not, ask it. And I think just getting over that is one of the biggest things. And I only found that out. I mean, and you would know, on the other side of the green door at a school of electrical. For us, it was when we were in undergrad. It was always the people on the other side of the green door, and we never really spoke to the lecturers or the tutorial the tutors. Sorry, it was bizarre, and you only realize it when you're on the other side that they're people. You know, you've got to overcome it. Just ask the questions as much as you can. And I mean, just talking on support from earlier is when I first started my master's, there was a professor in our school, Professor Hofsire, who created this course on research methods, and it's on EDX as well for now, I guess, with the lockdown, and it really helped, like in terms of keeping you kind of on track, and you know, just ensuring that you yourself were asking the right questions when you were doing your research. And I think that was one thing that really helped in terms of content and understanding where you were with your research.
That's fantastic, Alessandra. So I've actually interviewed Prof. Hofsire on the podcast.
Oh, cool.
So we've got a lot of his insights, and that was a really fantastic episode. And just, you know, really, I think, agreed with a lot of your sort of sentiments around the accessibility of lecturers, you know, and his approach to really trying to get into the headspace of the students and understand how to help them and so on. And then really focus on goal achievement. You know, there'll always be great courses, and he's built a lot of great courses, and there are a lot of great courses out there. You know, there's no shortage of material, but it's, you know, that trusted, safe space within which, you know, your own journey of self-discovery through that content and with somebody to help you along the way, you know, actually helps you achieve what you want to at the end of the day. So that was a very special podcast, and he's offered to come back on the show as well, because I think he's got so much to offer and so much insights about, you know, how much the world of tertiary education is changing, which is going to be very exciting to watch. Alessandra, just then let's you know, look at your postgraduate studies, and I'm sort of particularly interested in, you know, the nuts and bolts of the research process. And you mentioned earlier getting words down on paper and the whole writing, you know, the level of importance of writing, and, you know, being able to interact with supervisors and develop a topic, pick a methodology, go into the field, data gather, etc., come back to an analysis, write a report, you know, all of that. No one teaches you to do it. You know, you've got these supervisors. What was your experience, and what did you think was important, and what do you wish you knew back then that you might want to tell somebody now that's getting into postgraduate studies? Yeah,
so I mean, one thing that I really thought helped me was the fact that when I first started, like I said, I had really no idea of where to start and where to go. But the fact that I just started reading, and I kind of read a lot. I mean, you have to with research. You don't know, you know, where you're going. But so I read a lot, and I had to kind of learn how to define that problem. And you know, the way that I did it was, when I read papers, I started writing reports. So not necessarily reports. Let's just call them, I don't know, they were almost like literature surveys, but I did them every week. So every week I'd read a certain amount of papers, and I'd write a report at the end of the week, just kind of outlining what worked, what didn't, and how it would help me or not help me in my research. And that got me into a really cool routine. So I mean, just the fact that I had these weekly reports building up in my backlog really helped towards when I started writing my proposal. So I thought when I started writing my proposal, oh, I still have to do a literature survey. And then I was like, no, wait, you know, let me go back, open those documents. And because I had gone so in depth in those weekly reports, it was a matter of copying, pasting, and maybe expanding a little bit along the way. So that really helped a lot. In terms of something that maybe I'd do differently, is I'd set stronger deadlines. is set that strong deadline of when you want to finish certain things and when you want to finish your overall research, and try stick to it as much as possible. I think I set deadlines, but you don't really know when things are going to go wrong, and it kind of 1 year turned into 2 years, and it was a bit frustrating towards the end. But yeah, setting stronger deadlines, I think that would have been great. And writing papers while I was at university, because now that I have a full-time job, it's just very difficult. So maybe someone on your podcast will have some tips for writing papers while you're working. But yeah, I think that's definitely something that I did. I definitely wrote those weekly reports, and also just, I can't remember what it was called, but writing without looking at your screen. Just, even if you don't have structure to your writing, start writing and just write. Don't look back at minutes. It really helps. Just the fact that you are doing it on a constant basis, so you're not just waiting for your proposal or waiting for your dissertation. You have this constant process of writing, so it just builds up to having your whole dissertation eventually there. Yeah. Yep.
So I mean, Prof. Hofstadter calls it generative writing.
Yeah.
Which I think, as you say, writing without looking at your screen, or writing without judgment, and really just unlocking the flow of thinking onto paper, which you can always go back and fix up. And I always say to the people that I coach that you can always fix up bad writing, but you can never fix up no writing.
Exactly.
So just getting those writing juices flowing is so important. And then just back to your point around, taking sort of proper notes and writing up almost reports about the literature that you were reading, and almost doing that on a weekly basis. So in one of my courses, I talk about, and I think it's in the course on academic performance and how to finish your degree, I use the term discussion paper. And that sort of just is a formal journal entry, if you like, or a memo that marks a certain stage of progress in your degree, which, and in my own experience, I found incredibly useful when I came to write up my final report. I had a number of discussion papers, which were formal checkpoints in my research, packaging some analysis or some aspect of my reading, etc., that generally I would send to my supervisors, but which was, for me, the greatest benefit, not necessarily for them. They probably maybe just scanned it or gave it a quick read through. But by the time I came to actually compile the content for my final report, I had so much that I could go back into. And some of those discussion papers, I actually created appendices, within my final report. So there was a checkpoint at a certain stage that was relevant to the reader, but it didn't necessarily flow with the integrated argument of the final reports. I totally agree with what you're saying there. And then the other technique that I teach is the weekly status report. So every Sunday night, I would send my supervisors a very short email, 5 things that I'd completed the previous week and 5 things that I committed to do the next week. And it kept me honest, it kept me accountable. It also meant that I streamlined all my communication with my supervisors, because they weren't getting emails from me at different times during the week. They knew that pretty much everything I wanted to let them know about my studies was going to go into that weekly status update, which they would then get on a Monday morning effectively. And I used to put the number of the week in the subject. So I would count, from the very beginning, week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, week 5, and I eventually got up to week 360. When I had finished my PhD. And then the last status report, or one of the last ones that I sent them, week 358 or whatever it was, I just put one line in there that said, what did I do last week? I completed my PhD, you know what I mean? Whereas at other times during the degree, I had done very little, because I was studying part-time, and all I had done was read one paper, you know? But then I knew I was in a busy phase of my life, and I didn't commit to doing too much the next week. So all I would put on that list of things to do the following week was read another paper. And then when I came around to the next Sunday, I could tick that off and say I did what I committed to doing last week. And that also built momentum and confidence in my own progress.
Yeah, it is. And just you mentioning that just reminds me that I did the exact same thing. Is the top part of my report would always be what I did last week, and what I was planning on doing the following week, and discussions about the previous meeting. And I think just the fact that, yeah, like you said, sending it through to your supervisors or supervisor every week holds you accountable. And that's one thing that you need when there's nobody telling you what to do. I could literally have gone to university and not done anything 5 days a week. And there were some weeks where I did get distracted, and that happened. But I think the fact that you're sending something to your supervisor keeps you accountable and thinking, you know what, I do have this to do for next week, so let me do it. And just that whole time management just really is a struggle, but it really helps once you've got it. Yeah. Okay,
fantastic. And Alessandra, just tell me a little bit about your methodology. And you mentioned, I think, that you sort of, it sounds to me like you went to more the qualitative type of research approach. So just give me a sense of the nuts and bolts of, how you handled your research and what you learned or found out the hard way with your methodology and data gathering and analysis, etc.
Yeah. So I did a qualitative research, and it was very different. So anything that I'd done in undergrad was quantitative. So when it came to thinking about qualitative, I kind of started off, and I didn't think that it would be so much work. I underestimated it completely, but I was really up for the challenge when I heard I was going to be doing qualitative, because it's something different, and who doesn't like a challenge? So I mean, just the fact that very few researchers had kind of done this qualitative research with this specific problem really caught my eye and really got me thinking. So one of the challenges was I did not know anything about the qualitative research. But anyway, so what I did, my research was a mixed methods approach, and I used an explanatory approach, which assisted me with participant selection. So to start, I started with some archived academic results, and then I did some surveys on the undergraduate cohort at the time, and I did my participant selection using both of those, so using the surveys and the results. So that was the quantitative part. So it was a bit of both, but the focus was really on the qualitative, which I used focus groups, and I did quite a few focus groups. Also not thinking too much about how long the analysis was going to take me. It's another story, but I did thematic analysis on top of that, and that was really great. I really enjoyed it, and just learning how to do qualitative, and just knowing that it was a completely iterative process for me, and it usually is, I guess. So yeah, so that was really cool. That was my research methodology and kind of approach. Yeah, but a lot of learning in my sense.
And I mean, just an observation would be that, traditionally people do associate the quantitative methods with the sciences like engineering. And yet when you're researching the human factors such as education, and in my own PhD, I studied, agile team environments, which is very much about the creative process of software development. And I use grounded theory, which is a qualitative research method. And there is a growing awareness of the importance of bringing those socially minded research methods into the engineering disciplines. And it's been quite interesting to see how that's started to get a lot of popularity. So I would imagine that you've explored some interesting and innovative topics in your research, which is obviously, I'm sure, very exciting.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And I mean, it was very scary at first. I mean, don't get me wrong, you're in engineering, and most people are expecting quantitative. So just even presenting my proposal was super daunting, but it was really cool the way that it was very accepted, purely because of the fact that it's like I said earlier, it's in the area where most people have their interests. All the lecturers want everyone to pass. They don't want anyone to fail or to have any kind of struggle. So knowing that there would be someone that was looking at that kind of research really, I think, opened eyes and ears to the qualitative side of things. Yeah, and just it provides a much richer data set. Just looking at numbers of people's marks and possibly even demographics doesn't always give you the full picture. So yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, what I learned with grounded theory was, you know, the frequency of a keyword in an interview, for example, doesn't necessarily determine its importance. It can often be the reverse, that someone in that interview might only mention something in passing, but you as the researcher and interviewer need to be able to read many other clues, such as body language and, you know, inferences, you know, and what you picked up in the literature, etc., to understand that because they've only mentioned it once, it's actually more important than they think they mentioned 20 times. And if you just did a quantitative frequency analysis, for example, of keywords, then you might miss out on those important insights. And what I learned through grounded theory was this idea of theoretical sensitivity, where you become so much more sensitive to the theory that you're developing as you know, understand and get to grips with the issues and learn more about what's going on in the world of the people that you're interviewing. So, you know, that I naturally deferred to my quantitative engineering skills, but it was a journey for me as well to become a lot more socially minded. And people traditionally think of it as the softer type of skills or the pink and fluffy. But, you know, the way I positioned my research was, you know, the rise of exponential firms and digital disruption and how that's all taken advantage of agile software development teams that rely on an essentially human creative process to build great software for people to use. And in fact, because that software is being used by humans who are naturally creative and socially minded, it's actually you know, the best people to create it are those that are in a creative and socially minded environment. Just the engineering and the discipline of the programming language is the means of connecting, you know, the two worlds, I suppose. And so, Alessandra, I mean, then just give me a sense of how you approached your overall, just you studied part-time or full-time for postgrad?
Full-time.
Full-time. Okay, great. So did you feel that you had more time than you actually did? And I mean, did you pace yourself? Because the temptation might be, well, I'm full-time, you know, I've got so much, I can, you know, go and join the soccer team or the running club or whatever. And whereas, you know, it could be argued that a part-time student has got the sense of urgency because they've literally only got 2 hours on a Wednesday night and 1 hour on a Sunday morning or whatever the case may be. Just talk me through your mental approach and how that maybe changed, you know, through the 2 or 3 years that you did your postgraduate studies.
Yeah. So I started off, so I was full-time. I started off thinking, okay, cool, I'm going to finish in a year. This is all good and well. But then you start getting your responsibilities from the university in terms of tutorials and, you know, after varsity labs, and you start running out of time. In terms of the fact that you're now sitting in a lab from 2 to 5, and sometimes it goes on from between, until sometimes even 6 o'clock. And you start losing quite a bit of time, and the urgency becomes a lot more when you realize that you've now gotten to that year mark, and you realize, okay, no, wait, I've done something wrong, and I now need to finish. Yeah, I felt like I could join other things. I did. I joined the postgrad association to try to get a bit more involved in the postgrad life. But to me, I think I wanted to do it in a year, but I think at the back of my mind, I always knew it was going to take 2 years. So I think the sense of urgency started coming in that second year quite strongly. And I started working a lot more in terms of overtime. I started working at night. So it wasn't just going to varsity 7 or 8 in the morning and working that throughout the day. I'd go home and I'd still work. And it became a full-time thing for me. I knew I had to get it finished. So I pushed until I got it. And it was a long road, especially towards the end when you start writing. The full document, it almost feels like you can't see that the light at the end of the tunnel. But there's a point where it kind of just like clicks, and you're like, okay, cool, that's it. It's gonna be done, and I can see the end, and you know, it became quite a cool journey towards the end, which was very interesting for me. Yeah.
So, I mean, just for someone listening now that's maybe in that at the moment, and they may be struggling and they can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, you know, was there anything that helped you get to that point where it clicked or the light bulb went on and you could see your way through to the end? You know, so you probably went through a couple of stages when you thought you had all the time in the world in your first year, and then the second year you realized, sure, but I've actually got limited time, I need to crack on. And then you got into that long, hard road of just creating a document and trying to pull it all together, and then you sort of saw the end of it. What advice would you have for somebody that's maybe in those latter stages of trying to get finished?
So I think in terms of that, you've got to know that it will finish. And I think at the point where you're feeling a bit despondent, you have to have trust in yourself that you can do it, because you've gotten this far. Like, you've done the results, you've collected the data, and I think it's a big part. And just doing that analysis and then writing up sometimes feels like it can be very long. But there's a point where, so for me, it happened when I got a job. And at that point I was like, I'm not going to be doing a job and finishing off my master's. So that kind of that rushed me a bit. Not rushed me, it got me on a very strict path. But also what I found was really useful, and my supervisor was there for me the entire way through my master's. And with her, she said to me, eventually she said to me, okay, now you've got to stop being a perfectionist. She's like, you're going to finish. She's like, let's set a deadline and you're going to finish by that deadline. We set the deadline for the end of March, and that was it. It was, I think, and I said it earlier, that hard deadline really, really pushes you to be determined and meet it. And just having something else on the horizon, so for me it was a job, really got me there a lot faster. But yeah, for me, not having a deadline and not being able to see that light at the end of the tunnel. So for me, that deadline, the end of March, really got me working hard. Yeah, so I think just keep positive. I think that's one thing with the writing process, is you've got to keep positive and have faith in the process. Yeah.
Have faith in the process. I love that. I mean, one of the techniques that I teach, and which I also used myself, was to map out certainly those last 6 months when you haven't really started your final report or your thesis or dissertation. It feels like a mountain to climb. You've got hopefully bits and pieces of the different sections, and I teach people to start your final report as soon as your proposal is approved, actually. Yeah. Start getting stuff into your final report, whether it's an appendix from your ethics clearance certificate or anything else like that. But when I sort of had 6 months left to go, I took a 6-month calendar and I mapped out week by week which sections I was going to work on in each of those weeks. And then I committed to my supervisors that I would send them that section. And I agreed with them before the 6 months started that by the end of it, I would send them a rough draft. And then on the plan, I gave them 6 weeks for them to go and review and get that back to me. And, that's sort of self-managed accountability. And I put that plan up in the morning. Every morning when I got up, I'd see that plan up against my cupboard, and I would literally tick off each day, put it across through the day, and you just day by day get closer and closer to that deadline.
Yeah, no, that is definitely useful. I mean, just being able to cross off something on an actual piece of paper, knowing that you've done it and sent it to your supervisor, just makes the world of a difference. And I mean, also, it's that sense of accomplishment. I think the fact that you're getting that one step closer to finishing your dissertation really helps. It just knowing that, I mean, you're physically just doing something every week, and it can get very difficult. I got stuck in the analysis part of my research, and I just wanted to keep analyzing because it was so interesting.
Yeah.
And there was so much in the data. There was, I mean, it was a fantastic data set. I mean, if I can say so myself, it was so rich, and I could have honestly kept finding new things in the data. And I mean, I did get to a point, obviously, with my research where I had found everything, but you want to keep writing. You want to make sure that you have that absolute contribution. But I think that's another thing, is you've got to know kind of the difference between the master's and a PhD. And sometimes when you're busy, you kind of overcook it a little bit with the masters. And I think that there is a point where your supervisor will tell you that's enough. So and have like faith in the process, have faith in your supervisor. They know a whole lot more than you do. Yeah.
Fantastic. I love that, and I think it's so powerful. And a couple of my students are in exactly the same position, where they're just stuck in analysis, and you almost have to just like really just help them go into writing up and think with the end in mind, you know. So you're going to have to convert this analysis. You're going to have to draw a line in the sand and focus on getting your degree, as opposed to focus on the perfect research outcome. So, you know, we all think naively that we could get a Nobel Prize for research or whatever, but we're actually there to get our degree, follow the process, but not lose sight of the fact that, to your point, you could come back to that same topic in your PhD, and you've still got that data set, and expand that data set and broaden it and do a PhD, and you still make the contribution that maybe you thought you hadn't completely, had completed in your undergrad study. So I think that advice is just so valuable for people listening in, and hopefully people do have supervisors like yourself that can give you that checkpoint and say, okay, you have done enough, now move into the next stage, write it up, get it done. You can come back to it in a PhD later on. And that's where maybe, as you were saying at the beginning, if people are in those types of support groups and they can talk to people who are a bit further down the track, they've done a master's, they've done a PhD, they can talk about their research. And even if the content and the topic is different, the principles of knowing when to move from one phase to the next and how to get that self-discipline and that management and that accountability to get through the process can sometimes be as important, if not more important, than the actual contribution and topic that you're working on.
Definitely, and I mean, I think that's I guess the difference with also with a master's and a PhD is a master's you're learning how to do research. I mean, you've never really done research before, right? So I think that's one thing you've also got to keep in the back of your mind is at the end of your master's, or for me at the end of my master's, it was the question was, can I do research? And I mean, I was quite confident in that, and I really enjoyed that whole process. Is you don't realize that you've learned how to do so many things and you've learned so much about yourself until the end. So keep an open mind and know that the process is all about learning and that you are growing as a person.
And then I guess building on that, once you've learned how to do research, in your PhD, you then get the opportunity to actually contribute to knowledge.
Exactly.
And expand humanity's understanding of the world around us, and use what you practice now in your masters. But then we expect you to be able to do research. Now we expect you to be able to make a meaningful contribution to society and to the field that you're working in and researching.
Yeah.
So what does that look like for you, Alessandra? Is there a PhD on the horizon? Are you going to go back to that data set and expand it? And are we going to see you in that PhD gown at some point? What does your next few years look like in terms of your student success?
So I would really like to do a PhD. I'm not sure I'm at the right point just yet. I'd like to get a little bit more experience in industry at the moment and understand a bit more about what I'm doing currently. So my initial very overcooked and overscoped masters included doing the quantitative side of this problem and really determining the predictors for success. So determining why students fail using both the qualitative and the quantitative together, but using machine learning.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so that's where I'm currently at. Is I'm at the point where I'm in the data science field, where I work currently, and it's looking good. I think I'm learning a lot, and I mean it's just fantastic. Just knowing that I might be able to do a PhD and have knowledge to really expand and contribute to student success, is really still one of my passions. So absolutely, I think at some point I'll definitely do a PhD, and hopefully be able to solve or maybe be part of the solution for students in engineering.
Fantastic, Alessandra, and I wish you everything of the best with that. And I look forward to having you back on the show. Maybe, you know, when you've picked up a PhD or you've got a plan to start one, or maybe even further on when you've done it and you've got that contribution and, you know, added that notch to your belt. So well done, and good luck with all of that. And this, you know, the insights in our chat now has been just absolutely fantastic and so valuable for our listeners. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I've really enjoyed chatting to you, and it's been great. I mean, first time or second time maybe I'm seeing you in person, so it's very cool. Thanks a lot.
Fantastic. Good, Alessandra, and look forward to seeing you also in the Facebook group for the Student Success Coach,
absolutely.
and celebrating lots of other of our fellow students' success and encourage them along the journey. So thanks, Alessandra, and take care. Chat to you soon.